landscape is indeed changing. We see more and more organizations moving towards global or at least regional payroll operations solutions. These solutions tend to be driven by HR or finance and often involve shared service centers and regional outsourcing. Shared service centers and regionalization tend to drive standardization and often involve the physical relocation of payroll resources into centers or hubs. And with these changes, we often also see a reduction in the in-country payroll specialists. Historically, these in-country payroll specialists, while perhaps not tax people by training, have housed a lot of the country-specific employment and wage tax expertise. While these changes can drive a lot of efficiency and economies of scale, they do raise some risks on the employment and wage tax front, and often highlight the issue of wage and employment tax governance within large global organizations. When we examine global payroll functions, there are at least two distinct components that emerge: the pure payroll operations and wage and employment tax compliance. So when I say employment and tax governance, I'm referring to an effort among many global organizations to clarify these distinct roles and responsibilities between pure operations and tax compliance within the overall payroll function. For example, I often get the question, who should own global employment tax? And my standard answer is someone needs to own it. There needs to be clear accountability, which historically was often not the case, but changes occurring around the global payroll operations often re-emphasize this need. The discussion is usually around whether wage and employment taxes should be the responsibility of the corporate tax group, or whether the ownership should reside in payroll, which often reports up through HR or finance. The real key to success is not necessarily which function takes responsibility, but that whichever function takes the lead, the organization has the right resources in place and roles and responsibilities are clear amongst the groups. These resources need to understand that the organization's overall tax risk profile, as well as have a deep understanding of the various compensation and benefit policies in order to ensure wage tax compliance. They also need to be very close to the day-to-day payroll operations, but whether they sit within tax, HR, or finance may be a secondary issue. There are a couple general areas where I've seen companies struggle with global employment tax compliance. First, non-cash fringe benefits as a category tend to raise reporting and withholding challenges. The rules for these types of items vary dramatically from country to country, and certain items are often managed outside of HR. For example, the personal use of company cars and the associated expenses such as fuel, insurance, parking, and other related costs is always top of mind when we think about global employment tax compliance. Cars are challenging for a few reasons. While the tax rules are often very clear that personal use is taxable, in many countries the rules defining how to track, measure, and value personal use are not well defined. Company cars can be a relatively high value item and therefore quite an emotive topic with employees as well. Mobile technology is another area that's increasingly more challenging for employers. We are more dependent than ever on our mobile devices, yet the tax rules in many countries have not fully addressed these technology changes. Like cars, personal use of a phone or a tablet is often considered a taxable benefit, but tracking and valuing personal use is not only tricky, it can be time-consuming and unpopular with employees. Another big area of concern are those items that never make their way to payroll. For example, certain expense reimbursements may be taxable. Expense reimbursement policies may allow for certain types of meal or transportation reimbursements, for example, but in some cases tax laws may view these items to be more of a personal nature and therefore subject to wage and employment tax. In some countries, offering gifts to employees or customers, often paid through accounts payable, may be a part of the cultural norm, but in many cases they may also carry the risk of employment and wage tax. I'll leave you with a couple of suggestions for employment and wage tax governance model. First, the tax and payroll functions need to work closely together to define roles and responsibilities, with a key focus on the employment and wage tax positions for various employee populations, including local employees, expatriates, and business travelers, for example. And second, the governance model should ensure completeness of the wage tax reporting base, facilitate the monitoring and implementation of legislative changes, and establish a framework to ensure the review of new compensation and benefit programs for proper wage and employment tax treatment. Once agreed, these roles and responsibilities should be documented, then tested and revisited periodically for sustainability.